Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 27, verse 12. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving the Jewish people instructions for what will happen after they cross the Jordan, and that will be the scene at Har Gerizim and Har Eval. And the idea is that half of the tribes of Israel will stand on one mountain, half the tribes will stand on the other mountain, and the Levium will be in the middle, and they'll say blessings and curses if people live their lives in a certain way, and everyone says amen. I'm sure it was a very powerful scene. Just want to look at the psukim for a moment about it. Again, chapter 27, verse 12. Ela yamdu levareches ha'amal har gerizim ba'avrachem es hayarden. These will stand to bless the people on the mountain of Gerizim after you cross the Jordan. Shimon v'Levi v'Yehuda v'Yisachar v'Yosef v'Binyamin, those tribes. 13. Ve'ele yamdu al haklala b'Har Eval, and these will stand on the curse on Har Eval. Ruvain, Gad, Vasher, Zvulun, v'Naftali. Okay, one question. If you look at 12, it says these will stand to bless the people. And if you look at 13, it says these will stand on the curse. It doesn't say to curse the people, it says on the curse. So why is the reference to curse different in wording than the reference to blessing? Let's go a little bit further. Verse 14, and all of the Levium, well, the Levium respond to the people loudly, and they say, verse 15, cursed be the person who makes an idol, which is disgusting in the eyes of God, and places it privately, and everyone says amen. And we go on to this list. There's 11 different curses mentioned. Now, it doesn't mention any blessings. So it's understood that the idea is supposed to be that they say these blessings and they say the curses, or they say these curses and they say the parallel blessings. Blessed be the one who doesn't do this idol. But the obvious question is, why does the Torah only list the curses and the Torah doesn't list the blessings? So the curses and blessings are being treated very differently here, both in the phrasing referring to them and in whether or not they're explicitly stated in the first place. So let's see the Kli Yakar on Pasuk base. These ones will stand to bless the nation. By the curses, it doesn't say these ones will stand to curse. Because good things, blessings, come directly from God. But curses, he says, are not direct from God. It's that God turns away and allows something bad to happen. It's an interesting way to think about things. A blessing is God handing something to us, doing something directly to us. A curse, he says, is God turning away and allowing something bad to happen. But that God doesn't directly do it. God sort of allows it to happen. He quotes the pasuk in Eicha, different ways to understand this pasuk, but at least one way to understand the pasuk is Kimi pi el yon lo seitzei haraos, as a statement, not as a rhetorical question, that bad things don't come from above, don't come from the mouth of God. Of course, bad things are God's decision, but we're saying that he kind of allows them to happen. Therefore, the language in the pasuk is these ones will stand on the curse. Not to actively curse, rather to sort of observe or warn about the coming of the curses. So actually, it's not even abundantly clear that there will be a curse, because it just means that God will allow a curse to occur. So it depends on a lot of other factors. Whereas if someone does something good, they can be sure that God will bring them blessings. That's why the language to bless versus about the curse. Why is it that the curses are said explicitly and the blessings are just sort of left to be derived? Because the primary bracha that God can give us is in the next world. We eat from their fruits in this world. The greatest bracha God can give us, is to be able to fulfill mitzvos in this world. The greatest bracha in this world God can give us is to be able to fulfill the mitzvos, because that will give us even more blessing in the world to come. But he says the reason why the Torah doesn't explicitly reference each of the brachos is because the whole nature of these brachos are somewhat hidden. It's an interesting thing to think about, right? We grapple with this all the time. We know someone who's so good, he does so many good things. Why don't we see more blessings in a person's life? The answer is because who knows what's going to be in the next act, in the next world. So just an interesting kliyaka to think about. Okay. What I'd like to do very quickly is, beginning on verse 15, just summarize really quickly the curses. Okay. I'm not even going to read the psukim word for word. I'm just going to kind of just summarize. In verse 15, it talks about a curse on a person who makes an idol and places it privately within their home. In verse 16, talks about a person who treats their parents lightly, disrespectfully. 17, it talks about a person who infringes upon someone else's borders. In 18, it talks about a person who fools a blind man on the path. 19, it talks about a person who unfairly tilts the judgment of a person in need in society. In 20, it talks about a person who sleeps with his father's wife. 21, it talks about a person who sleeps with an animal. In 22, it talks about a person who sleeps with his sister. In 23, it talks about a person who sleeps with his mother-in-law. In 24, it talks about a person who strikes his friend in a manner that people don't see that it happened. In 25, it talks about a person who accepts bribery to inappropriately punish a person. And in 26, it curses a person who doesn't uphold all the words of this Torah. Now, this sounds like a real rogues gallery of sins, but the question is obvious. There's a lot more sins discussed in the Torah. What is the thread among these? Why did these make it to the list? So just to share two different perspectives over here, we'll start with the Sforno. Sforno on Pasuk Tesvav, Arur Ha'ish. Hine kolu arurim amru tchila b'lashon baruch. It's an interesting thing to think about. First of all, the Sforno says each of these blessings actually not only is the flip of it said as a blessing, blessed is the person who treats his parents with respect, whatever, but actually says the Sforno, the first thing said is the blessing, not the curse. He says that's the tradition. Presumably, the biggest indicator of it is in verse 12 when it spoke about the blessings. It spoke about the blessings before it spoke about the curses. So that implies the blessings were said first. So even though the first things that were said were blessings, still the Torah only mentions the actual curses. The Kliyaka already addressed this question. Why does the Torah mention the curses and not the blessings? Now the Sforno is going to take his approach. The primary purpose of these curses is to curse those in violation of them. Kidei shehem levadam yisu avonam, so that the perpetrators of these sins alone will bear the responsibility of these sins. And other people will not be jointly responsible for them. This is a very ironic comment from the Sforno, because there's a very famous idea in the commentators that the whole idea of the Jewish people standing together and hearing these blessings and curses together on the mountains actually implies joint responsibility, that we're all responsible for each other. But he says, even though that's true, the whole thrust of these curses is that with these specific sins, to the exclusion of other things, if a person commits these sins, that person should be cursed, and it shouldn't be on the rest of the people. Why? V'zeh, ki achotim ha'elu hayu al harov rashei ha'am. Because most of these examples, when you think about these sins, most scenarios that these sins are perpetrated would be by people in prominent positions among the nation. Shelo hoya al hoediotos limchos biyadam. That regular people couldn't stop them. His theory is that these types of things are the type of things that if regular people would try to do it, they would be stopped by their peers. And that these kind of sins frequently are the types that people who could get away with it do it. And generally speaking, these are people in positions of power. Of course, not 100% of the time, but it's not fair to punish the entire nation because someone who couldn't be stopped did a sin. So he says the reason why it says the curse and not the blessing is the real purpose of this whole set is not as much to bless people for doing the right things. That's great, but guess what? God would bless the people even if they didn't do it in our Grizim and our Evil, if they do the right things. The real purpose of these speeches are to make a very clear point that if someone commits one of these sins and they do it because they're able to and other people can't stop them, they bear the curse alone. So the thrust of it is really about the curse. It's a very interesting idea from the Sforno. Now let's go on to the Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim on pasuk Tes Zayin, Arur Makleh. Tzarich Lodas. Why are these the specific ones mentioned? By the way, even when you talk about illicit sexual relations, the list given is just strange. It's like he says, for a man to have relations with a married woman is more grave than these examples, and it's not listed. It's like even in at least some of these examples, it's strange not even why broadly it gave this example, but why didn't it mention a comparable case? This is the most, a number of commentators say this in one way or another, but this is, I think, the most common answer to the question. We're specifically listing sins that are hidden by nature. If you noticed in verse 15, and even if you didn't notice, in verse 15, it says in the pasuk that cursed be the person who creates an idol and places it in seclusion. I don't understand. If the problem is creating the idol, why does it talk about placing it in seclusion? Because if a person does puts an idol in the middle of the street, that's everybody's responsibility to do something about it. We're specifically zeroing in on examples where people don't even know what's going on. The second example, a person's disrespectful to their parents. It's the type of thing that it's not like a case that can be brought and based in. It's sort of a subtle thing. I want to have 5 more feet in my backyard. So I kind of play with the fence a little bit. Most people don't even realize that it happened. Even the neighbor doesn't even necessarily realize that it happened. The person who tricks the blind man on the path. The whole point is ain't roa. He doesn't know that he was tricked. People who manipulate the judgment of downtrodden people in society, and so on and so forth. So the Orach Chaim is saying something different than this Sforno. The Orach Chaim is saying the thread among this list is these are types of things that are naturally things that society doesn't even know that they occurred. And this point, it sort of dovetails with the Sforno. The Sforno says that in general, people are responsible for each other, but these are things, it's hard to expect people to take responsibility because they don't know that it happened. So therefore, these get specific curses, specific curse on people who do these sins that society can't stop them. So we discussed the Kliyakar regarding the nuances in the psukim between how it speaks about blessing versus how it speaks about curse. And we discussed the Sforno, the Orach Chaim, regarding why these specific sins are mentioned.